Welcome back to the Self-Esteem and Confidence Mindset podcast with me, Johnny Pardo. And today I welcome Dr. Robin Hills to the show. And I'm excited for our conversation and where this is going to go today. So a quick introduction to Dr. Robin, and then we're going to dive into the conversation. So Dr. Robin Hills is the founder of EI4 Change, a UK-based organisation specialising in emotional intelligence, resilience and leadership development. With over 500,000 learners worldwide, he's recognised as one of the leading voices in practical emotional intelligence and its impact on personal and professional success. Robin brings deep insight into how self-awareness and mindset shape confidence, well-being, and authentic leadership. Welcome to the show today, Robin. Glad to have you on.
It's an absolute pleasure, Johnny. Thank you for having me on your show.
Absolutely. So, Robin, I'm looking forward to hearing about emotional intelligence, because it's a term that I hear a few times, and particularly in the personal growth space, and sometimes when hearing about leadership. So yeah, we'd love to first of all start off with, what is your definition of emotional intelligence, and what's got you so fascinated into looking into this and leadership development? How did your journey take you to this?
Well, there's a lot within that question. Let me start off by saying that when I started my working life, emotional intelligence had only just been recognized in the academic circles, and a few academic papers have been published, which I wasn't aware of at all. And it wasn't until the mid-90s, when Daniel Goleman published his books, that it came to the public forefront. At the time, I had been working, or was working, within the pharmaceutical industry as a sales representative in the London teaching hospitals. And I found that there were some doctors who I engaged with at a very, very deep level, very, very quickly. And there were some who I had no capability of engaging with at all. And I didn't realize what it was until I understood that it was around the way in which they were using their emotional intelligence. And that was a great revelation to me. My career moved on into a leadership management role, where I learned the basic art of being a leader, which involved a lot of emotional intelligence. And then through a series of redundancies, I found myself looking at an opportunity to build up a business based around what I do and what I enjoy doing. And that's working with people and helping them to build their self-esteem, self-confidence, and to improve their performance at work. So EI for Change was established in 2008 during the financial crisis. Not the best time to set up a business, but here I am, 2025, going into the late 2020s with a thriving business.
Oh, wow. Going how you got that. And it's great that you decided to start in 2008, as you said.
Well, I had no choice. I hadn't got a job anymore within the company that I was working for. So it was really a case of, well, what do I do? Do I go and find myself another job? And I thought, now, do you know what? I can make myself redundant here. So that's the reason why I set the business up. And then moving on, Johnny, to the next part of your question, what is emotional intelligence? Because these two words, emotion and intelligence, they don't really seem to go together, but they are bandied about a lot. And I found that there are a lot of leadership coaches and trainers who will run a workshop and they'll run a module on emotional intelligence, which I find really quite insulting in many ways, because emotional intelligence actually underpins good leadership. Everything that a leader does is underpinned by their emotional intelligence. So the definition that I use of intelligence, despite the fact it's a very complex construct, is being smart with your feelings in order to make the right decision and build up authentic relationships with a view to taking action. That's it.
Building up your feelings. I love that. So do you feel like anyone could develop a good level of emotional intelligence, or do you think some people can, some people can't? I'd love to hear your views on that.
I think we all can, but we've got to have the right mindset and we've got to have the right attitude, and we've just got to be open to developing this aspect of who we are and what we are. from the research, it seems that cognitive intelligence is fixed in our late teens. So from the age of 17 onwards, we can't get any brighter, but we can develop our emotional intelligence. We've got an infinite number of opportunities to develop our emotional intelligence up until late old age, when really cognitive decline starts coming in, and that prevents us from becoming more emotionally intelligent. And if we look at the older people within society, they are the ones with wisdom. What is that wisdom? It's the fact that they're comfortable in who they are, what they are, that they know how to disseminate that wisdom and to do it in an emotionally intelligent way.
I love that view that anyone can sort of develop, but having the right mindset behind it as people kind of have that intention to actually want to be good at it. What do you think people may misunderstand about emotional intelligence, or maybe some misconceptions out there?
I think there are quite a few misconceptions because a lot of people don't really understand what emotional intelligence is. I do have a lot of senior executives who have real problems within their organization, within their teams, who will tell me that they are emotionally intelligent. Well, the very fact they're having to tell me that suggests that they're not. If anybody says to me, I am emotionally intelligent, it's like a red rag to a bull. I then have to control my emotions and manage it in an appropriate way and say, oh, tell me what you mean by that. And then they'll come out with some trite way around how they're good at managing everybody else's emotions, making them angry when they need to be and making them fearful when they need to be. And they want all their people to be happy, and they strive towards doing that, yet they operate in this culture of fear and loathing. So I'm not too sure how the happiness works in that area. So let's go back at some and have a look at some other myths. Emotions are physiological and psychological reactions to our environment, particularly as it changes around us. So a lot of people think that emotional intelligence is all about managing a dozen or so very simplistic emotions that we're all aware of: happiness, anger, fear, guilt, shame, embarrassment, anxiety. And yes, those emotions do form a part of emotional intelligence, but I'm not feeling any of those emotions at the moment here, Johnny. And I would hope that you're not feeling any of those emotions at the same time. But between us, we are reacting emotionally to the way in which we're talking to each other and the conversation that we're having. And your listeners will be reacting emotionally to what they're hearing. And that will then change the way in which we think, and it will change the way in which we behave around the podcast interview. So emotional intelligence is a lot more complex than just understanding a handful of emotions and getting people to understand what they are and what they mean.
Mm. For someone who's like saying, they want to, they like growth, they want to work on themselves, they want to have the skill of emotional intelligence, but they don't know where to start. Where can they start?
Well, usually what I would do is to encourage them to take a personality or a behavioral assessment. And there's some really, really good ones on the market. Myers-Briggs type indicator, DISC, NEO, Ocean. You'll see that most of them are acronyms, and that seems to be what happens in the psychological sphere. But these are great tools for giving people a lot more self-awareness. And they're also great tools for helping people to understand the way in which they think and behave and how that differs from other people. They've got to be used effectively with good coaching. I think if people go onto the internet and take them like they would take a horoscope, they'll get some insights, but basically they won't do anything with it. The coaching element is vitally important around that. And that helps people to get that self-awareness, which is a cornerstone of emotional intelligence.
Self-awareness is something that often gets mentioned on this podcast, and coming back to it. Is there anything you found useful in your practice for self-awareness for yourself?
Yes, I'm continually looking at my own strengths, my own limitations. But more importantly, I'm looking at the impact of those when I'm interacting with other people. because you will have heard the expression of strength overplayed becomes a weakness. I think with the variety of people out there in the big wide world and the relationships that we've got, we can't treat everybody the same way. When we are looking at emotionally intelligent behaviors with groups of people, there are going to be some people that engage with us through the interactions that we have, and there are some people that won't because it just doesn't work for them. So you can't please everybody all the time, but if you can please the majority, you're actually doing a fairly good job.
Another sort of question with around the kind of dealing with like high pressure. I want to kind of like shift to this because in like leadership and in life, and I know, well, I think pretty much everyone I know has to deal with some kind of like perceived kind of like stress in a workplace environment, maybe outside of that. How do you feel like emotional intelligence can help with dealing with stress?
Well, I think you're absolutely right, Johnny. We all have pressures. We all have various things that are causing us concern on a day by day basis. And some days we can coast through life quite freely and quite easily. And then there are other days where exactly the same sort of pressures can have an amazing impact on the way in which we think, feel, and behave. And this is where self awareness comes back into the picture. But I think the important thing that people do need to realize is that we cannot be motivated unless we have a degree of pressure or a degree of stress. Take away stress completely, take away pressure, and life becomes incredibly dull, incredibly boring, and it's very, very hard to thrive and succeed in that environment. So we've got to get the balance right. A little bit of stress, which is known as eustress, is very, very valuable to us. But it's being able to manage and control that stress. And it's very easy for me to sit here and talk to you and say that, Joddy. But there are going to be times when life throws a few curved balls at us, and they really do knock us out of kilter. And I think we just got to recognize when that occurs, why it occurs, and recognize that this is realism, this is life, and we just have to learn how to adapt and cope around it. Again, very easy to say, very difficult to do in the heat of the moment.
Is there anything in sort of the heat of the moment that you found useful for dealing with like stresses?
That is a really, really interesting question. Because when I am intensely angry with somebody or something or in a situation that is to a certain extent way out of my control, I know the theory. I know what I should be doing. Yet it remains very, very hard for me to manage that emotion and to suppress it and to change it into something which is a little bit more pleasant. It's very, very hard. It was Aristotle who said, back in ancient Greece, anyone can become angry. That's easy. But to be angry with the right person at the right time, in the right way, and for the right reason, that's not easy. And he's right. So, being an emotionally intelligent coach, trainer, and facilitator, I point that out to people and then say, look, if anybody's got any way of knowing how to do this, can they let me know, please? Because I cannot do it. And then I think in the heat of the moment, I think we've got to recognize that life will move on. It will change. The situation will change, maybe for the worse, maybe for the better. But what we've got to do is we've got to recognize that life has meaning. We have some purpose here. And let's look at adaptability. Let's look at creativity and see how we can resolve this situation to get the best out of it, the best out of perhaps even a bad job.
Interesting. I think that's an important point that I've certainly been caught up on, like in my younger days of like, I'll get to a point where I get like no anger and things like that, but part of being human, right?
It is. What I'd like to say here, I think this is vitally important to distinguish myself away from a lot of other people who say that they train emotional intelligence, is that motivation, which is another component of emotional intelligence, contains a little bit of anger in order that that drives us forward and in order for us to affect change. So to actually strip anger out of our lives completely is a wrong way of looking at it. What we've got to do is to utilize that emotion, recognize the value in it, and look at utilizing it in an appropriate way. It's a great emotion when used well.
For like drive, yeah, rather than destruction, it sounds like.
It is. And what I would encourage people to do is to look at emotions, whatever emotion it is. And let's get away from this myth of positive and negative emotions. Some emotions feel quite pleasant, some feel quite unpleasant. Um, and what we've got to do is to look at the emotional state that we're in and say, how can I use this in a constructive way? What is the impact of my behavior going to have on other people? Is it going to build up or is it going to destroy? And that will help us in terms of the choices that we make.
I want to ask you about sadness. Say that someone's just feeling very sad and they might be thinking right now, well, how can I use sadness in a constructive way? Or how can I use that in the right way? I don't like being sad. What would you kind of say to that?
No, neither do I. Look, let me take you back exactly a year ago. Exactly a year ago. My mum died. And to a certain extent, it wasn't unexpected. Even though it happened, was incredibly sad. And rightly so, because she was my mum. And I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for her. The important thing with the sadness is to recognize the value of that emotion, because what it allows us to do is it allows us to come to terms with our grief, to recognize all the good things that have happened that have led to the sadness, and then it kind of resets us physiologically and psychologically to move on from that point. Now, I still look back with a degree of sadness, but the intensity of it is not as great as it was a year ago. So I think what we've got to do is to recognize the value in sadness and to then question, why am I feeling this emotion with this level of intensity? Because it's those questions that will help us to come to terms with our situation and to move forward. So what is it that has been taken away from us? What is it that we're missing? What is it that's gone? What is it that we can't have anymore? That is probably what is driving the sadness in the majority of situations.
So it's almost like emotions are like a messenger to us.
Yes, I would consider emotions to be data, and a lot of people are involved in working with data. I mean, nowadays we're looking at data driving artificial intelligence. But look at us as human beings. Our emotions contain data. They are telling us why we are reacting to the changes in our environment. To repeat what I keep saying, it's this physiological and psychological change. So, how do we interpret the data? And how do we manage the data? And how do we put that data to work and get it to work for us rather than against us?
I like the term data that you're using. I've not heard it like that before, but it makes a lot of sense. Data from ourselves to understand ourselves and work with ourselves.
That's right. That's right. Like I say, change your mindset about emotions, and suddenly the world opens up in a different way to you.
Robin, a lot of people like listening to this podcast are wanting to really work on their self-esteem and how their relationship with themselves, how they feel about themselves, love themselves a bit more. How do you feel like working on your emotions with yourself, like working with your emotions helps that, understanding them?
Well, I think really what we've got to do is to help people to understand that emotions are perfectly natural components of what makes us human. And again, if we look at them in terms of containing data, we're not looking at emotions in terms of being incredibly happy or incredibly sad and bursting into tears all the time, or getting incredibly angry. I know that a lot of the work that you do, Johnny, this erstwhile work that you do in terms of well-being and health around mental health, particularly with men's mental health, men have got to come to terms with the fact that we are emotional beings, and we've actually got to work with our emotions much more effectively. So let's not just utilize our emotions in the football ground or around the soccer pitch when our teams win or lose. Let's take it into our relationships and recognize the value that these emotions can have in terms of the people that we're going to be interacting with on a daily basis.
I like that. Yeah, transferring it to like multiple, well, just to life, just understanding understanding ourselves through that data. I like that. It's a
Yeah.
great
And
point.
also, I think it's vitally important to allow men to cry.
Mm,
And what I mean by that is that they don't have to burst into tears because they are incredibly sad. Look at what it is that actually makes you well up. What is it that actually hits some kind of visceral something within you that makes you well up? For me, I find that I can listen to some pieces of music and I can't listen to those pieces of music without them hitting me in a very, very hard emotional manner. I actually enjoy listening to those pieces of music because they make me cry. And they make me
same.
cry in a really, really happy way because I love the pieces of music.
I
Let
spent,
me,
yeah.
sorry, go on, go on.
No, go ahead. Go ahead, Robin.
No, I was going to share something that I did a couple of weeks ago that in a way, I wish I hadn't done, but I'm really, really glad I had done. I went into AI and I took one of my professional photographs and I went into an image generating artificial intelligence generator. And I said, okay, take this photograph and recreate this as a young teenager. And it did. And the output that came from that looked very much like me, but it wasn't me. And it didn't look like me as a teenager, yet it looked like me from a future representation of that boy's future. And it hit me somewhere, which meant that I could not look at this image without really starting to well up. There was something within it. I looked at the image, and the boy had been through some of the same traumas that I had, and I could see that on his face. But the boy wasn't me, yet it was me. It looked like me. And I showed it to my wife, and she said, no, it doesn't look like you at all. But I can feel that boy in me. And that really is quite deep, quite penetrating. And I look at it very, very occasionally just to remind myself, well, that's what I could have been. But you know what, Johnny? I'm glad I wasn't. Because as the ugly, gangly 13-year-old that I really was, it's meant that I am actually the man that I am today. And had I been that boy, I would have been a completely different person. So I think I've just got to be thankful that I am me. Great, interesting exercise, but it opened up a whole lot of philosophical question that really I wasn't quite prepared to have thrown at me.
Wow. But I like what you were physiological changes and allowing yourself to cry or allowing ourselves to cry is it's been a powerful one like yours is music. There's certain musics that can get to me as well, can get to certain memories and make me feel things in certain ways. And it's interesting that like, I don't know, after I felt that be like 15, 20 minutes later, I feel really happy.
Yes, and I think what we've got to do is we've got to encourage people,
Hmm.
not talk about men in particular, because I think women have
People.
got to do the same. People have just got to learn to express themselves in an appropriate way and allow themselves to experience these emotions, even if they do it in private, but experience them for the right reason and to experience them for pleasant, constructive reasons rather than the unpleasant, destructive reasons that we associate with crying, for example.
Do you feel like it can impact on our relationships with others, how much we relate to our own emotions?
Oh, of course it does. Yes, yes. People who are very good at suppressing their emotions because that is the thing that men do are finding it a lot harder to build up good quality, deep relationships because a lot of women are a lot of partners. Doesn't necessarily have to be a woman. They want that kind of deep emotional engagement. If somebody is continually bottling their emotions up and suppressing them and not showing, then how can that be a sharing, caring relationship? It can't be. So I think what you've got to do is to make yourself incredibly vulnerable within a relationship because you have the safety there of knowing that you can be vulnerable and you've got your partner there to be able to support that vulnerability because your partner is as vulnerable as you are.
Mm. Because I know, yeah, a lot of people. I've been there, like just like I'll keep my like whatever relationship, not necessarily intimate for me, but like maybe it's like family, friends, people like that, just all kinds of relationships. I know when I've not expressed my emotions, I'm like I'm fine, and I'm just not fine in the background. It's had like a knock-on effect. So I was just curious in your
Yeah,
view.
look, let's build upon that, Johnny, because it's an incredibly important part.
Mm,
Because the expression of the emotion is very, very hard. And a lot of people
mm,
feel that, okay, I've got this emotion, I shouldn't express it.
mm,
Anger, let's go back to anger. It's a nice, easy one to work with.
sure.
This is an emotion I find incredibly difficult to express. So I'm feeling anger, and I, to a certain extent, control it, manage it, work with it. I'm fully aware of it. And then there are times when something comes along that really hits one of my hot buttons, and I need to express that anger, and it's like a blunderbuss. It just goes off. And when my girls were a lot younger, they knew when dad was incredibly angry. And what they would do is they just go and hide around the back of the settee. Not because I would get physically abusive to them, but it would just be loud, uncontrollable, and not appropriate and not very pleasant. Fortunately, it didn't happen that often, but I still find it incredibly difficult to express anger. So what I would encourage people to do when they've got an emotion and they don't know how to express it, or they don't know what to do or what to say, is just to recognize what the emotion is, give it a label, and then say to people, I'm feeling incredibly angry at the moment because this has happened, that's happened, and the other's happened. And you will find then that people will be able to respond better because nobody can argue. Nobody can argue with your emotions. They can argue with your thinking. They can argue with your cognitive analysis. They cannot argue with your emotions. I'm feeling incredibly angry at the moment. No, you're not. Just doesn't
Oh,
work. Just doesn't work. But you're doing this, you're doing that, you're doing the other. And the consequences of that is it's making me react in this way. No, I'm not behaving that way at all. You've just got it all wrong. And so it then compounds and builds the argument. So what we've got to do is to learn to express our emotion, even if we get it wrong, just by saying, I am feeling incredibly, or I'm feeling extremely. Express the emotion. Happy that you and I are talking at the moment, Johnny, and it seems to be going incredibly well. Oh, you're not, Robbie. See how it works. I am feeling. Just learn to put that at the beginning of your sentences, and it will be a lot more powerful in terms of building up your relationships than what you think.
I am feeling in a certain way, like expressing how you are and being honest with yourself. Like that. So yeah, Robin, when you go and like work with individuals, maybe it's like teams and stuff like that. Do you ever find there's any resistance to work on emotional intelligence?
Oh, can I tell you a little story here, Johnny? All the people that come on my emotional intelligent workshops come on the emotional intelligent workshops because they want to, and because they've got relatively good levels of emotional intelligence and they just want to hone it. The people who need to come on workshops, you can't get them kicking and screaming into a workshop on emotional intelligence because they all think it's about fluffy, soft, woolly emotions, and it's not. So when I'm going in and pitching business within an organization, I'm talking about the junior middle managers here. We have to take a fairly complex advanced emotional intelligence course or an emotional intelligence structure, and we call it an introduction to emotional intelligence. When we are putting together a program for the senior leader team, it's a really basic, simple course on emotional intelligence, what it is and what it means and what they can do with it. And we have to badge it an advanced emotional intelligence course, because if we didn't badge it that way, they wouldn't come on it.
I love that.
Unfortunately, that's one of the realities that we have in terms of working with emotional intelligence.
Yeah, you can't force someone to work on it, right, or anything.
No, but all the senior leaders think they are so emotionally intelligent that they
That's a
really,
crit
really do
advance.
understand the basics. So we have to call it an advanced emotional intelligence to appeal to their ego. Yet really, it's a very stripped down basic introduction to help them to understand what it is and what it means.
I think some of the best teachers I've learned from in sort of my journey are always humble. They're always like wanting to learn more and admit they're always open to learning. So I love
And they are probably the more emotionally intelligent leaders and teachers that you've had the pleasure and benefit of working with.
absolutely. No, I love that. No, Robin, I know you're obviously offering like tons of value out there, and I know you've got a lot of resources around the support you offer the world. Before we sort of wrap up today, I'd love to know where can the listener find you if they want to reach out to you, they want to jump into your work, and is there maybe a final point you'd like to leave us with today?
Well, look, let's bring into the attention of the listeners my website, which is ei4change.com, ei number 4change.com. You can go on there and there's a lot of resources on there. There are free quizzes, you can sign up for free courses, you can download free books. So that's where my business is situated. If you want to get in touch with me, it's robin@eiforchange.com, or go and find me on LinkedIn. Just put Robin Hills into a search engine and I should come up. And then in terms of leaving your listeners with a final thought, the important thing to stress is that there is only one of you. There will only be one of you. So go out there, go into the big wide world, face the challenges that you have to face, and do so to become the best version of you that you can possibly be.
I love that. There's only one of us. We're all guilty of forgetting that, but there is only one of you. Thank you, Robin, for leaving us with that one. Become that best version. And yeah, if you want to jumping into Robin's amazing resources, the website's going to be linked up below. Obviously, contacting Robin, we'll leave that link there, and his LinkedIn as well. So you can check that out in the show notes below. So a massive thank you, Robin, for coming on today.
And a massive thank you, Johnny, to allow me to express my thoughts and views on emotional intelligence. And hope your listeners find it incredibly valuable.
They will. So, Robin, thank you. Yeah, I appreciate that. So that concludes our episode for today. And remember to lead with your heart and not with fear.